Hello, and welcome to IlLUMAnations, which aims to showcase some of the healthcare and biotech industry's leading scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. My name is Themasap Khan, and I'm a co-founder and partner of Luma Group. Today, we're honored to be joined by Ritish Patnaik. Ritish is a scientist by training and the CEO and co-founder of Curve Biosciences, a pioneering company in the chronic care space and one of Luma's earliest investments. I've known Ritish personally for many years now, since back in graduate school at Stanford. He was doing some amazing work in Professor Sean Wang's lab, which ended up becoming the bedrock that Curve is built upon today. We're thrilled to be part of Curve's mission, having led their Series A early in 2024, and we're incredibly excited to see where their outstanding technology can take them. More importantly, to partner with excellent founders like Ritish, who embody the principles of mission and passion we value here at Luma Group. So Ritish, we like to get to know our guests here, and we like to know what brought them to this moment in time. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your upbringing and your story and what got you to launching Curve.
Yeah, so I was raised in Dallas, Texas. And just like you, I was raised by two amazing immigrant parents. My parents are come from India. And honestly, like my hometown and my cultural upbringing influenced me to get into biotech. Because being in Dallas, there's just a lot of chronic disease. A lot of my family friends are dealing with liver disease, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease. You know, their parents were dealing with diseases as well. And, you know, it's just kind of the story of what we see oftentimes in the South, in the United States. And so I think it was a mixture really of seeing that disparity in healthcare, as well as just seeing the huge effects of chronic disease on, you know, people's lifestyles that led me to really want to get into medicine. And of course, I had some great teachers in like biology and chemistry who helped me along. And, you know, that kind of upbringing encouraged me to go pursue biomedical engineering here at, you know, Columbia University in the city of New York. And then also go on to do my PhD at Stanford, where we met. And man, I don't know about you, but I had a good time at Stanford.
Yeah.
Got to learn a lot. I spent a lot of time doing things that maybe I don't want to have to sit through again in the lab, right? But definitely, I feel very blessed to be where I am right now and to have pursued a career in biotech.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I know being South Asian, there's a large affliction of disease when it comes to the chronic conditions that exist in the world, diabetes, obesity. And so it's something that culturally, I'm sure we're hyper aware of. And often I think in our personal lives, trying to make ourselves healthier so we don't run into those same things as we age. So it's great to hear that part of your story. Grad school is great. I'm sure it was for you. And Professor Sean Wang has such amazing work. People have spoken so highly of him. If you look at what he's accomplished in his career, it's been exemplary. And you talked a lot about chronic diseases and getting into grad school. And, you know, like you, we've spent a lot of time in academia, but what was a moment that kind of you thought, hey, I'm going to take my career in the direction of launching a company to solve a problem? And what was that problem that you got to work on?
So before I get to that specific question, I do want to kind of give you a sense of what my career what my career path became after grad school. Like I was interested, frankly, in entrepreneurship, right? Stanford has that huge influence on everyone who's on campus to think about the next startup. But also I was interested by larger pharma companies. Genentech has a huge influence around the Bay Area. Also, you saw like Merck, AbbVie, multiple companies go and establish headquarters, or like I guess Western headquarters in South San Francisco as well. So for me, I wanted to understand both, because in biotech, you see a lot of great startups go and commercialize great technologies, and then eventually, especially in the therapeutic space, like get acquired by a larger company that then commercializes it, right? And so I actually started my journey in pharma itself. I went and worked at Roche, Genentech specifically, in their pharma partnering group. Honestly, working at Genentech was one of the best experiences of my life. I was the first straight to PhD hire for the group, and they really targeted and recruited me when I was finishing up at Stanford. So, you know, Genentech was really pursuing this AI first vision for their R&D group known as GRED. And I came in, you know, to understand pharma. And it was just a nice marriage there. So I got to work across multiple deals, internal projects as well. as Genentech was making this transition towards being AI ready, so to speak. And that actually encouraged me to go start Curve.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this role, like we were working at Genentech, Roche Pharma as well, the separate group in Basel, and also Roche Diagnostics. So I got exposed across, pharma, healthcare delivery as well, but also diagnostics. And one thing I was just kind of seeing early on, this like 5 years ago, is that we were about to have this like flood of cardiometabolic drugs coming to us. Semaglutide was showing some really exciting stuff, GLP-1, right? But we also were seeing really exciting things with resmetirom, right? Resdifra, Madrigal's drug for MASH. And what I realized, by looking at that trend in therapeutics, but frankly, the lack of infrastructure built in diagnostics, is that we're going to have this flood of cardiometabolic drugs coming in, these chronic disease drugs, yet we didn't have the right diagnostic infrastructure set up for these drugs to be really optimally distributed out to the populations, like to maximize the impact of the drugs on these like patients with chronic disease. And that's what really encouraged me to go start Curve, because I saw this need. I developed some technology, which we'll talk about later, in grad school that could meet that need. And if it wasn't going to be me, it was going to be someone else. So why not just go do it?
Yeah. Well, we obviously agree. We're lucky to be enough partnering with you guys since year A, and having led that, we think diagnostics will have a very important, impactful future in medicine. We think prevention and being more preventative and things that can lead to larger unmet needs like many, many chronic diseases is a very important part of what innovation has to play in terms of the future. And I thought when we learned about what you were doing, obviously at Curve, and I didn't say the AI word first, you did. These are great applications of using what used to be called data science, right, into leveraging how compute can build off of those platforms to give you those insights at the biomarker level to help guide or detect or monitor treatment decisions for patients. And chronic diseases is complicated, right? It's not just one gene that's giving you a certain mutation, or it's not one type of cancer that's driven by one type of mutation or several mutations. It's really systems biology level impacts that are happening, and often cognitive and behavioral and socioeconomic factors, I think, play a big part into what happens in these patient communities. But it sounds like you took a lot of your work at Stanford and you went to Genentech to work on some big problems and projects, and then spun out Curve. But what would you have to say to people out there that are currently in grad school or in their postdoc, or even professors thinking about launching their technology into something that's venture-backed or can become an eventual commercial business? How should they think about the current work they're doing and the trajectory to actually launching a company?
Yeah, and especially in light of all the different approvals we've been seeing in the chronic disease space, I think it's really important to just go do it. Like if you see differentiated biology, or you have a differentiated platform that can go and identify that novel biology and a novel compound, perhaps to existing biology, the biggest inhibitor of these technologies getting out to patients is that they stay as research papers. And I do think, for example, venture groups are stepping in here. They're doing very deep canvases, analyses, let's say, of literature and doing a lot of great venture creation. But for professors and students who say, hey, I have something here, you'll find a community of people who say, I agree, right? And you can take it from being a research paper to actual product in a company by taking that leap. And I think the most important thing here is finding the right team and finding the right investors, right? And so team is extremely important here. You can't do this by yourself. You just can't. Trust me, I didn't try, but I've really been able to benefit from working with very experienced people who have been there and done that. And then you also want the right investors, like how we've partnered up, who are patient. You'll hear this term patient capital oftentimes. It's very important, as you've really imparted onto me. But also folks who understand that, with the patients, there's this understanding delays happen, right? Some things are out of your control. Some things that, they can identify that are within your control to prevent those delays. And I think also by working with the right investors who have a very, very valuable portfolio of companies, they can give you insights from other companies that are still in operation or past companies they've invested in. For you as a, in my case, a first-time founder, to be able to essentially learn from so many people at once without having to, necessarily burn my hand on the stove to begin with, right? And so, I'll just tell people, go and do it, but don't think you can do it alone, because frankly, you can.
Mm-hmm.
Build the right team, get the right investors, and just do it. And ultimately, you're gonna be able to look back and say, this is awesome, and it succeeded. And even if it doesn't succeed, because look, these are risky endeavors, and there's a reason it's called a venture.
Yeah.
You can say I tried, and you never have to wonder what if.
So Ritish, I can think of a number of chronic diseases out there.
Yeah.
There's diabetes, there's obesity, there's diseases that progress into more serious diseases of different organs, and then eventually even cancer. How do you prioritize where to take this first? What are the first tests you're thinking about developing?
Well, the first thing you told me is don't do everything at once, right? So we are prioritizing, fortunately. And, I think you just have to read the environment, read the room, so to speak, right? FDA just approved GLP-1s
Mm-hmm.
for MASH, which is a chronic liver disease. Essentially, it's a severe form of fatty liver disease. I'm simplifying it a bit. And so we are very interested in the liver disease space. And we'll provide more information about this, in the new year. But our first product is going to focus on an end stage chronic disease and meeting the needs of that population. But our second product is going to be much broader and actually make a massive impact in the GLP-1 landscape. So again, more details to come, and probably right around JPM.
Yeah.
But we're really, really excited by the liver. We're also looking at things like kidney and the heart as well. But as you said, there's so many opportunities, and we've really focused in on the right ones for our first two products.
But why is chronic disease testing even important? Why does it matter detecting these diseases more at the biomarker level earlier on? What does this information allow the healthcare ecosystem to do with it?
So let's start with the corollary of cancer, right? A big thing for these cancer detection companies is the word prevention. And what I would say for chronic disease is it's not necessarily prevention, it's impeding progression.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, we're going to be discovering these patients at a moderate state of chronic disease. And the goal here is to get them the right therapeutics such that they can get to an earlier stage of chronic disease. We're impeding the progression to a late stage chronic disease. And ideally, we're reversing it back to an earlier stage of chronic disease. What this results is significantly improved patient outcomes, meaning people live longer, people live more full lives, they're more capable of, living their full life. And then also a reduction in the number of procedures they have to do, drugs they have to take down the road, which translates to a higher standard of living, but also, frankly, just less healthcare costs.
Yeah, that's the impeding progression once you've discovered a patient actually has a disease. So you talked about the problem a lot. Chronic diseases are a big problem in the United States and really globally. Tell me about the solution. So how do we address this?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a great question. So I'll just give you the mission statement first, if that's okay. We at Curve, we use whole body intelligence to resolve chronic diseases. Now, what does that mean, right? We've created the first molecular blueprint of the human body by carefully manually curating the world's largest collection of comprehensively characterized tissue samples into what we call our whole body atlas. And from the whole body atlas, we build these whole body intelligence models that are trained on the clarity of the atlas to identify chronic disease states through our proprietary blood tests. And really the effect of this is that with these blood tests and with these whole body intelligence models, we are detecting diseases earlier and more accurately than other diagnostics.
So Ritish, let me just maybe step us back a little bit and tell us about blood tests and the use of blood tests today on what they can achieve and the current tests out there that can achieve other types of diagnostics and what you're specifically talking a bit more about here.
Yeah, and I'll focus in on the chronic disease realm here because definitely we talked about blood tests for cancer and stuff. this will be, an hour-long conversation. Really, when we look at what is being tested in the blood for these patients with chronic disease, we're looking at proteins that were discovered in like the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
This is biology that was identified very early on to be specific to certain tissues or organs,
Mm.
but not necessarily to disease states of those organs. The underlying kind of assumption here was that if the tissue is diseased and damaged, then it would release more of this specific protein
Mhm.
to indicate that essentially this organ is damaged. But we haven't seen that to be the case. A lot of these proteins, they just do not show great performance.
Mhm.
And as a result, a lot of patients go undetected for many years or even decades until the disease has progressed to such a stage that treatment's no longer effective.
And so just to maybe
Yeah.
summarize it, that means if an unhealthy heart has a biomarker in the blood,
Yeah.
you may catch it up, or it could be coming from another tissue and it may not have nothing to do with an unhealthy heart. How do we think about that?
Yeah, it's all about, you're hitting a very important point here of disease specificity, organ specificity as well. I think there's two really important elements here is, yes, first identifying that what you're looking for in the blood, the target of it, what we call a biomarker, is actually seen in the disease of interest. That's not a problem that people really have in the field. They get a bunch of diseased tissue samples and they find that signal.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is, how do you truly know that that biomarker is specific to the disease of interest? And that's where we step in with our whole body atlas, where we've characterized the biology for every tissue in the human body, as well as over 50 different disease states.
And just to summarize for the listeners, obviously, to get that type of resolution in data, we're not going to biopsy every tissue from a human every time they go in for a test, and therefore it would behoove us all to use a biomarker that's easily accessible, like something in blood.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what's really important here is that whatever biomarker you look for, you have the utmost confidence that it's not going to come from another disease state or from another organ that's healthy, right? Otherwise, you're just getting a bunch of false positives. And then patients are going on for other diagnostic procedures, maybe like imaging, or they're going on to biopsy when they don't need to necessarily. And so what's really important and what we at Curve have focused on is, how do you really achieve this disease specificity without necessarily sacrificing the copious amounts of data that you can leverage through AI to be able to get the best performance possible, right? So it's like you're curating down to a finer list or a finer set of biomarkers that can still be leveraged with AI to be able to provide the best performance possible.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess for the benefit of the listeners, how long did it take you to pull this whole body intelligence platform together with the Atlas?
I mean, look, there's a reason people do long PhDs, right? And so the whole body atlas did start with my PhD work. And so it's been over 8 years now. Yeah, just right about 8 years. So look, we have over 400,000 tissues in the whole body atlas that represent every single tissue type in the human body, as well as over 50 disease states. So what we're able to do is look at the biology of a disease of interest, look at everything else in the human body, and essentially filter every single potential biomarker from the diseased state to everything else. So that way we know this truly is only going to be seen if this disease exists in this patient.
So blood tests have been developed for a lot of different things. Namely, oncology is a very big sector where they've been developed. They've been developed for early stage testing of patients with certain cancers, a la Grill and what others have been doing. They've been used to diagnose the type of cancer someone has by doing a liquid biopsy, essentially, of it to understand the driver mutations of a certain cancer. But I haven't seen their application go beyond that into things like autoimmune disorders or chronic diseases.
Right.
What let you unlock the chronic disease focus of developing a test that is sensitive and specific?
Yeah, look, blood-based testing for chronic diseases is a very, very difficult problem. And it actually requires a completely different stack of technology. And the reason for this is, we'll go back to some biology, physiology here, if you don't mind. I guess I kind of go back to grad school for a second. Is that when we think about the blood, it provides oxygen to all the tissues in the body.
Mm-hmm.
But in exchange, these tissues provide different biological material from dying cells within the organs, right, or within the tissue. And what we see when we go and characterize this biological material in the blood is about 6% of it comes from the different organs in the body. 94% comes from dead blood cells itself, and then 6% comes from all the other tissues in the body. Now, this 6% is very high when you consider it as noise that can cover this biological signal that you want to identify from a disease. So this 6% noise, in order to overcome it, we built the whole body atlas for this, right? Look at it as like, it's kind of this digital reconstruction of the biology of the human body. And to our knowledge, it's the largest tissue database in the world. And with the biological and clinical data that we have for all these different tissue types in the body and the different disease states, we're able to return to clarity by connecting the methylation patterns for each of the DNA fragments in the blood back to their origin tissue to be able to analyze the tissue's health. By doing this, we cut through that 6% background noise and really are able to isolate down to 0.02% tissue signal or disease signal in the blood by comparing the DNA methylation state of the target disease to these other, tissues in the human body. So as a result, the signals that we're going after are truly disease specific and do not appear, anywhere else.
Tell me a bit more about methylation.
Yeah.
You've mentioned this concept a few times. I think it would be helpful for the listeners to understand what methylation specifically is, because it's one of the main components of the analyte here you're trying to detect, characterize, and identify how it's differential.
Yeah, so methylation is this really incredible phenomenon that actually dictates how we go from being one cell originally to all the cells in our body. And what it is essentially a chemical modification of one of the DNA base pairs that, when it occurs consistently in certain parts of the genome, leads to those areas of the genome to be silenced. Basically clusters up together and it silences that area of the genome so it can influence what genes are being expressed and which genes are not being expressed. And this is extremely important. I was telling you about like one cell to many, because methylation is essential to the development of the human body, to all the different cell types arising from one single cell, because there's different methylation patterns for each cell type. And as a result, you can have a liver and have a kidney come from, again, the originating cell. What we've also seen is that methylation can be disrupted due to lifestyle, due to, environmental factors, due to aging. And we see that these quote unquote healthy cell types accrue additional changes in their DNA methylation patterns throughout the genome and go to diseased types. And so DNA methylation is not only linked to our initial development into, fully formed human beings, but also, frankly, our deterioration over time into disease.
Right. I think about this problem, you can start with thinking about trying to find a needle in the haystack.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one of the ideas here is that is a very challenging problem. So you can do a couple of things. You could remove all the hay, right, to try to find that needle, and hopefully you find it. You could make that needle much brighter or a different color, and you can try to go find it. In the needle in the haystack problem, which is a signal to noise problem, tell me how I and others should think about what Curve's test is able to do in that type of paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, look, to your point, right? People have tried to build stronger magnets to pull out the needle, right, from the hay. We just burn the hay. The way we think about it is that there's so much hay. Let's really look to understand the hay or the noise. And we've done that with the whole body atlas, such that we could remove all the hay and then the needle remains.
Right. And it's actually even probably more complicated than that because the hay is a rainbow
It's
that
different for every
represents
person.
different people
Yeah.
and different organs.
Right.
And you're trying to really shine the light on the part of the hay that's heart or liver or kidney specifically.
Yeah, and look, the promise in this field 10 years ago was if we get a whole bunch of blood samples from from people who have a disease, let's say cancer, and a whole bunch of blood samples from people who don't have the disease, we can use, AI to be able to distinguish what markers to look for in the blood based on these two different sets of patients. But based on what we've talked about so far, the blood is much more complicated than that as a system. And so you can't actually approximate the noise from the blood itself as well as the other tissues in the body through this collection of blood samples from these two different groups. And we've just learned that by seeing the clinical results of these past tests. What we've learned is that you actually have to go and comprehensively understand the source of all this noise. So ironically, in order to build the best blood test, you actually have to study the tissues. You don't actually get a whole bunch of blood on both sides and try to find the differences between them. You have to understand where all the biological material in those blood come from. So therefore you need the originating tissue sources.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Curve's introducing whole body intelligence. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we are all excited, not just in biotech, but throughout every industry about the potential of AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Specifically to biotech, we have already seen the promise of AI in terms of medical imaging, right? We've seen so many advances in terms of diagnostic performance, discovering like new features in medical imaging. And the next frontier was supposed to be blood-based testing. This is what everyone's been promising for 10 years. But frankly, until now, emerging blood tests have just not met the expectations of clinicians. And that's because to this point, these blood tests have been working off suboptimal AI models that have been designed and trained on opaque, chaotic blood data. And these models, they're ultimately confounded by that 6% background noise that I was describing earlier from the other tissues. And with whole body intelligence, we're introducing a form of artificial intelligence that really has been trained on verified biological truth of every tissue type in the human body through our whole body atlas. And what we found is that this is extremely powerful for diagnostics. We're overcoming these noise issues that other companies are struggling with because we truly understand the noise, and we're building AI models that understand the noise. I think the way I'd like to kind of characterize this is that we take a really clear, organized approach to identifying the origin of all the DNA in the blood through the whole body atlas. So, we're discovering this disease-specific biology, as I mentioned, with the whole body atlas. But what we're also doing is we're creating these whole body intelligence models by first pre-training large language models, otherwise known as LLMs, on our whole body atlas, and then performing supervised fine-tuning of these LLMs on tissue and plasma data that we're collecting through our clinical trials. So the whole body atlas acts as a foundation for these whole body intelligence models that we're building at Curve. And then we can, again, kind of fine-tune them towards specific use cases based on different samples that we acquire through our clinical trials. And what this allows us to do is that, with these models, the initial focus of these models is to deliver really optimal testing accuracy, and as a result, optimal patient outcomes through our blood tests. So our blood tests provide the input biological information from each blood sample for our whole body intelligence model to then provide the most accurate output. Because again, it's been trained on the whole body. It hasn't necessarily, it's not confounded by sources of noise that the body can provide because it's already learned from it.
Right. Yeah. I think this is such an interesting application of AI. Obviously, over the last decade plus, we've been talking about it in the life sciences, on how it's going to impact drug discovery, things like hit the lead, as well as drug development. How can we make things like clinical trials better, faster, cheaper? as well as other application spaces like the radiographic imaging space.
Mhm.
Can AI detect cancer on an MRI more efficiently than a radiologist and trained eye could? And I think we're still trying to understand those things. But the area you talk about is also very messy, which is the blood. The blood is has a lot of different things in it, and it's very hard for us in our Neolithic ways to open and excel and understand tissue expression patterns
Mhm.
or methylation expression patterns to understand what the disease tissue is. And so what you're able to do, it sounds like, is train these models on very well validated data sets that you have curated,
Right.
400,000 samples you talked about before across 50 tissues, and I asked the AI, build me a set of biomarkers and panels I can go after to try to validate a certain disease. And that's a really cool application, I think, of AI. We think a lot about AI impacting diagnostics. We think AI can probably impact things like the physical world in medical devices a lot. And so it's very interesting to see how this is a really great use case for being able to develop something and something you'll be testing. So I'll ask you a little bit about your plans,
Yeah.
right, of how you actually test this to tell the world that it's all actually true.
Mhm.
So it was very exciting for us to hear that story, and I think now you guys are getting to some very exciting developments.
I agree with you, and I think our head of computational science just pulled me aside the last time I was in the Bay Area and told me, hey, I think with the whole body atlas, we can realize like an ImageNet type moment for biology,
Mhm.
and there'll be multiple ImageNet moments, but Curve can provide, I guess, maybe the second ImageNet moment here after radiographic imaging in terms of blood-based testing.
Yeah.
And what I really hope that we can do is inspire a whole new set of companies to also think very deeply about the biological systems that they're studying and looking to perturb, just like we have with the blood.
Mhm.
I think, like when we're talking about biotech companies, there's a term that's thrown around in other industries. Like all biotech companies are quote unquote deep tech companies, right? You're going after really difficult problems. And sometimes these problems are really difficult because the system that you're studying, that you're trying to change, is highly complex, as you mentioned, right? For in our case, the blood. For other biotech companies, other physiological conditions and environments. And so I think it's really important to take a step back initially, which I got to do during my PhD, and ask yourself, how do I capture the complexity of the system as best as I can?
Mhm.
So that way I can find the best solution possible, right? And that's how Curve started. It wasn't a, hey, this thing's super hot in terms of like AI, let's throw out this problem. It was, hey, let's appreciate the problem that we're trying to solve, deeply understand it, take the time to characterize it, and then come up with the solution. And as a result, we're seeing just some fantastic results in the chronic disease space and a lot of excitement also in terms of external partners
Mhm.
who are looking at, cancer.
So we have to talk about it.
Mhm.
This company called Grail,
I'm aware
which
of it.
I would love for your thoughts on explaining what they do
Yeah.
to our listeners, was a poster child
Mhm.
for cancer diagnostics, leveraging blood. They may not have achieved what they had set out to do initially, and there's a lot of challenges for the big mission that they were embarking on. Could you talk a little bit more about Curve's emphasis on the type of work that they're doing and rolling out to the market?
Yeah, of course. And look, we deeply appreciate and respect Grail. Their vision for enabling multi-cancer early detection through blood-based testing in the general population is visionary. It's still visionary. It was visionary when they announced it 10 years ago. It's visionary now. They definitely had a great outcome for their investors, being acquired by Illumina for $8 billion.
Mhm.
But they have not yet met, what we would characterize as clinical expectations, right? We've learned a lot from Grail, and we're taking a different approach.
And tell me about that. Why should people care about Curve's mission vis-a-vis what's happened to Grail and their commercial launch and clinical adoption?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about this from the perspective of, investors, but also patients, right? And I think when we've been building Curve, we've focused on three differentiating factors. The first is our commercial opportunity compared to companies like Grail. Let's call them the cancer testing companies. So look, we'll be unveiling this more publicly over the next few months, but we can give a little bit of a tease here.
Give us more than a tease, Ritish.
Well, the short of it is that economics is on our side when we think about chronic disease, and it's tougher to make this argument when you look at cancer, and that's partly due to the large prevalence of chronic disease in the United States. We have about 130 million people in the United States who have at least one type of chronic disease. Now, those patients are getting pretty poor standards of care. They're using like low resolution imaging, like ultrasound, or those old blood tests that I was talking about, with proteins discovered in the 50s and 60s. And what this has resulted in is significant costs to the healthcare system associated with chronic disease because of later diagnosis, deterioration of health, and frankly, the use of treatments that aren't effective because the disease was discovered so much later, and because the drugs themselves don't work as well. But the good news here is that things are about to change. We are seeing a flood again of chronic disease drugs. I mean, I think the one that people are most aware of is Ozempic, right? Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, and these drugs are impacting people's chronic diseases. And what we need to be able to expand accessibility to these drugs and really maximize their implementation in these broader populations is blood-based monitoring. So the commercial opportunity for Curve is just significant, but also realistic in terms of replacing standards of care that don't meet the bar of what's needed for the future of chronic disease care. The second thing I'd want to touch upon is our technology advantage. And we've talked about this a bit, right? Like, frankly, the cancer companies have been confounded by the 6% background noise from the other tissues in the blood. And as I mentioned, these tests have not yet met clinical expectations as a result. And with whole body intelligence, we're really overcoming that issue, right? Like, we can open revenue streams here, not only in chronic disease with our own products, but we've already had some of the cancer companies approach us about partnering, so that way we can use whole body intelligence to enable their cancer-based testing as well. And then the last thing I'll bring up is, I don't know how else to put it other than our operational edge. Look, again, providing multi-cancer early detection is an amazing vision for the world. But there is no standard of care that is being replaced with multi-cancer early detection blood testing. So essentially, these blood tests would introduce an additional healthcare cost. Our roadmap, by contrast, is really focused on replacing poor standards of care and demonstrating like significant improvements in patient outcomes that then result in significant healthcare cost savings. And these two factors, in terms of the healthcare cost savings as well as patient outcomes, is what ultimately drives adoption in this market and, frankly, success for the company. And so when I look across these three different aspects of the company, our commercial opportunity, our technology advantage, and our operational edge, I just see us building a company that's learned from a lot of the successes and drawbacks of companies in the cancer space. And as a result, we're going to be able to go and make a huge impact in chronic disease.
So I know I have you here today at Luma Group HQ.
Yeah.
But we're not alone in this. And you have a superstar team. These are individuals that have worked at amazing, trailblazing companies in this space. They have built real products that are being used in the clinic today.
Yeah.
So they've really seen the 0 to 1 journey at some of these other large companies.
Yeah.
I want to learn about them. Maybe tell our audience about how you guys got to working together and why you think this is the best team in the world to be working with. Because obviously we both believe that.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I'm so proud and excited to honestly work with a team of like 20 co-founders, right? And I'm trying to think about like, how do I answer this question without taking up an hour? So I think for the sake of brevity here, I'll focus on our executive team. And we've heard enough about me, right? So let's take a look at our chief scientific officer and our chief operating officer first, Nathan Hunkapiller and Alice Chen, who first joined Curve as advisors. And this is a common thread we have with our executives, is that they've joined as advisors first to the company for about 6 to 9 months. And then just gradually, working with the different folks at Curve have come to me and said, hey, can I join full time? And so it's always a gift when that happens. And I'm so blessed to be able to say that, this happened with Nathan and Alice, and this also happened with Chuba, who I'll talk about in a second. But Nathan and Alice, I mean, they really know how to run R&D and product, respectively. They were the head of R&D and the head of product, respectively, at Grail, but also at Natera. And so Grail, as I told you, had a great outcome for investors, acquired by Illumina for about $8 billion. And Natera went public in 2015, is now worth over $20 billion in the public market. And the reason that they were able to get there is, partly, of course, huge organizations, a lot of contributions, but I can tell why both these organizations had a great result is partly because of the leadership provided by Nathan and Alice on the R&D side and product side, to be able to really think deeply about the right type of science to pursue in order to maximize the effectiveness of each test is R&D's full goal. And Nathan embodies that to a T. And with Alice, she really has this fantastic grasp of getting the right insights from patients as well as from providers or doctors, and be able to kind of craft the product vision around meeting the needs of those patients and those providers. So that way, when the product launches, adoption is very easy. I mean, you still have to put in the work commercially. Not gonna, underscore that. Not gonna belittle that in any way at all. But when you set a product up properly that meets the needs of the customers, it's easier to sell. And Alice knows how to do that in and out. And, Alice and Chuba, they're kind of the big three, as I call them. The third member here is Chuba Oyolu, who's our chief technology officer, CTO. And he, again, joined as an advisor and then came on full time. Chuba was the founding scientist, the first employee over at Council, and he was responsible for Council's production lab, which was processing, I think at its peak, 30,000 samples per month. And this is for non-invasive prenatal testing. They did some hereditary cancer testing as well. And Chuba, again, as first employee, he's guided me so much in terms of, hey, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should avoid that. Maybe we should, we should definitely not do this. And so it's just great to be able to work with someone who had that, kind of initial seat at another company and be able to guide Curve to an even more successful result, ideally, than what he saw at Council, which already had a great, successful exit to Myriad Genetics. And, the last person I'd love to emphasize, because he and I are very close. He decided that, hey, this kid did his PhD with me. I'm going to sign up for a few more years working with him. And that's our scientific founder. You mentioned his name, Professor Sean Wong, who's, I would say the co-inventor of the Whole Body Atlas alongside, myself, Nathan, and the whole R&D team. And, we started building the Whole Body Atlas together, me and Sean, back at Stanford. And now he's our chief innovation officer. He's come in, he's accelerated our thinking about the whole body intelligence models alongside our head of computational sciences and alongside Nathan, our CSO. And Sean keeps us at the cutting edge, right? Because he's seeing the cutting edge every day at Stanford. He's literally an endowed professor in the School of Engineering at Stanford. He's been there for over 30 years. This is the highest honor that you can get, right? The breadth of what he's contributed to the world is amazing. He has over 300 publications, over 70 patents. And this isn't things like magnetic biochips, in vitro diagnostics, of course, with Curve, biomarkers, and now data mining, right? And he's founded multiple companies, including Curve, where he is the most active, right? He's in the office every week, right? And to be able to work with those caliber of people, and by the way, each of these folks, they get their hands dirty. Nathan is pulling up Excel, making pivot tables, looking at data alongside our head of R&D.
I know that because I often email them asking questions and they get back to me with graphs and tables.
Yeah, and it's not, he doesn't ask people to go do it. He's like, oh, you know what, I'll do it myself too, right? I mean, he works with our head of R&D that way. Like Alice is in each of these customer interviews with our head of commercial strategy, and she's working actively on the product roadmap with her. And Chuba, I mean, every day in the lab, these are people who take on the responsibility of leadership, but also the humility to continue to be an individual contributor. And that's the type of team, that's the type of co-founders you want to build with. And I feel, again, very fortunate to say that they do embody what we have at Curve, but we don't have just the 4 of them. We have a team of 20 co-founders, everyone who takes on leadership, but also gets their hands dirty. And that's why we've been able to get so much done in such a short period of time.
How about all of the patients that don't know they have a disease because of the lack of compliance? It really affects America and the world writ large pretty broadly. How are you thinking about expansion plans for Curve?
It's a great question. And it's one that, we get all the time. First I'll focus domestically, if that's okay. We've built our initial base in the Bay Area, just one of the roots of biotech in the United States, alongside Boston, of course. And I really see us expanding to 2 other regions in the US. One that we're actively building is a second base in Texas. And the third one, frankly, will be in the East Coast, ideally, maybe even New York City. And so I see Curve having this kind of tri-coastal presence. And chronic disease, as you mentioned, it is a global problem. And so we do want to bring our testing to patients across the globe, and we're finding the right partners in each of these other countries outside the United States to work with to bring our testing to those patients. And so I think, we'll have some really nice updates about that in 2026 and moving forward, but definitely a lot of really interesting discussions underway because, we're the first chronic disease testing company out there.
Well, it's been an exciting journey to see all of the amazing technological advancements and professional advancements you all have made. You've got a rock star team. You've got some capital from great partners that we get to also work with. And you get to move now and build some amazing products. What is your vision for the company?
That's a good question. I mean, I've always operated off 2 North Stars. First off, I love learning and I love people. And at Curve, we built an environment with the right people where we're learning key insights about the human body and being able to apply it to helping patients with chronic disease, right? Resolving chronic diseases. And so, when I think about vision for Curve, I ultimately want Curve to build a universal platform where we are able to provide organ-level health monitoring, which enables proactive, personalized, reimbursed care across the major chronic health conditions that drive healthcare costs and, frankly, human suffering. And I really feel like at Curve, we've built the right foundation to achieve this vision. We just have to keep down the path. And with the support, again, of a great team, as well as great investors like Luma Group, we feel really optimistic about being able to achieve this vision and helping the world. This is stuff that you and I have always been talking about, right? Right team, right investors, so on and so forth. I guess, is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of what we've done well so far?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, Ritish. For us, it's been a journey, and it's hard to sometimes illustrate that to other founders we're in discussions with, maybe for investing in their company or following on. I mean, if you remember, the first time we met before we invested was almost 4 to 5 years before we wrote the check into Curve. This was after graduate school. You were really trying to wrangle with, what is Curve going to be? What are you going to do with this rich data set? You just spent 6 years
at that time
building and cultivating, where in the diagnostics market you wanted to go and what your superpower was. And I thought what was very special about seeing your development was the way you started to focus on product. You found an application space where you thought you could win, and you put an amazing team together. And at that point, you made it very hard for us and other investors to say no to you.
Hmm.
And diagnostics is a hard business. It really does matter how great your test is. It matters how great your team is.
Right.
And it matters how great your vision is, because there's a lot of challenges along the way. And so I really appreciated, all of us at Luma Group really appreciated your thoughtfulness in the way you put together the team and vision. Ritish, thank you for coming out to Luma Group headquarters here in New York City. It was a pleasure having you. We're so excited about the vision and what you guys are going to achieve. And I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to the big press releases and all the great things coming down the pipeline.
Thank you for having me, and please feel free to invite me again. I'd love another opportunity to put on a suit.
For our listeners, stay tuned for more conversations on IlLUMAnations. For those interested in learning more, you can visit us on lumagroup.com, where we're regularly publishing white papers across a variety of exciting topics.